Welcome to the 9th video in this series on creating atmospheric nighttime visuals in VRay for Rhino. In this video we're going to be following on from the last video on adding in artificial lighting into our scene, and we're now going to be adding in some people to populate this scene and add a bit of storytelling and narrative to this view. Now we're going to do this in two ways. We're going to start by adding in some 2D cutout people, almost as silhouettes within our building, and then we're also going to be looking at how to add in three-dimensional people into this scene as well. So to begin with, we're going to start by adding in our kind of 2D cutout people to our scene here. And to do that, we're just going to open up, and I've downloaded some cutout people which we're going to be using for this. Now I downloaded these people from an online source like mrcutout.com, which I'll put a link in the description of the video to. And you can get these from a lot of places online, but they're just sort of PNG cutout people with the background sort of cut out for you. Now before we import this into our Rhino scene, we first need to create what's called an alpha map to allow Rhino to understand that it needs to cut these people out. Essentially what an alpha map is, as you can see from these examples, is a black and white version of that image. And what it would do is it would tell VRay to cut out wherever's black in the image and leave wherever's white, essentially creating a kind of 2D silhouette of that person. So to create one of these with one of our downloaded images, we're going to just open up Photoshop, find our image, drag and drop it into Photoshop like so. If you hold down the Control or Command key if you're on a Mac and hover over the layer here, you'll see a little kind of dotted square over your icon. If you then click that layer, it will select those objects for you. Then we just need to make a new layer. We're going to fill this first layer in white. Then we're going to deselect the area, just selecting the marquee tool and clicking anywhere on the scene. Make a new layer in between those two layers. Switch it to black and fill it in black. And that's your alpha map. And then we can just save this out. And we're just going to call this the same name but alpha at the end, like so. And I'm going to just save this as a JPEG, like so. So there we have our alpha map and our image file here. Now in order to bring this in to our VRay file, we need to create this as a texture and apply it to a piece of geometry in the scene. So we're going to begin by creating the geometry we'll apply that texture to. As we're just doing a cutout of the people, all we need to do is create a simple vertical plane for these people to be added to. Now I'm just going to create this plane, we're going to snap it to a corner of the scene. We're going to make it 1 meter wide, like so, just by typing in 1, and then 2 meters high, just by typing in 2 there, hitting enter and left clicking. And then we can zoom into this plane here. Now we've made our piece of geometry, we now need to kind of add in our image texture to that geometry. And to do that, we're just going to open the VRay asset editor. We're going to make a new material. We're going to make a generic material. We're just going to call it people and 1, like so. And then for the diffuse color, we're just going to locate that particular texture and add that in as the color, like so. And then for the opacity here, we're going to click on our texture slot, put in a bitmap and load in that alpha map there, or opacity map, and hit back. And there you can see in the preview that it's now cut out from our surface. Now we've done that, we're just going to select our plane, right click and apply this to the selection. And in order to test it, we can actually just set the view up here to a rendered view to have a look and see if that's looking correct. So there you can see we've got our cutout people in place. Now it might be once you added these, you might find that the kind of image is a little bit squished. I think these are a little bit too narrow. If that's the case, we can always go to the scale tool, use the scale 1D to just pick a point kind of on the top, a point on the edge here, and scale it up a little bit. Now you see my kind of Rhino's got a little bit slower because we're in this rendered view, but we're just going to do it just for now, just to get the right size, and I think somewhere around there looks about the right scale. And then we'll left click to accept that, and then I'm going to turn it back to my ghosted view to keep it smoother and faster. So now we've made that texture, we're now going to move this plane inside the building, and let's sort of zoom in back on our structure, We'll drop it somewhere around there and just go zoom selected to snap ourselves in. And then we're going to move it inside the building like so. There. Now what you want to make sure is when you're using these cutouts is that they're facing the camera. And my camera is not quite front on, it's slightly angled, so we're just going to roll it around just so you can see here that this is sort of facing the direction of the camera, like so. And we're going to kind of move this into the back of this room. Now to have a look and see what this is looking like, let's just select our camera, open up our frame buffer here, and we're just going to load up a preview so we can have a look and see what that kind of cutout people look like. Now these sort of silhouetted people, because they're only 2D and flat, you're not going to get a kind of 3D geometry with them, but they're really good for sort of internal scenes just to provide a little kind of outline or a silhouette of characters. And we can kind of see them faintly through the glass there. It might be that I want to move them forward a bit so we can see them in a bit more detail here, like so. So we can kind of see their cutout just coming through there, like so. So it's all quite subtle, just sort of subtle characters just sat in that top floor. And I think I'm going to keep mine over to the left here for this particular composition. Now what we can do is we can do this a few different times, making different textures for the people and adding these in different locations across the building. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly pause the video, repeat the process with these other cutout people that I've got in here, so with these two figures, and we're going to place those in the scene as well. So I'd recommend doing this with a few just to give a bit of population to the inside spaces of your building. So just pause the video and we're going to come back once I've populated this. I've now finished adding in some 2D people here, and you can see these are now just subtly showing through the glass here. We can get a few coming through this corridor and a few in this upper level here. And this is what these 2D cutout people are really useful for, just creating a kind of subtle effect of crowds or people, and I usually use them behind glass or if they're kind of casting a silhouette to give a kind of atmospheric look to the image. But they do have their drawbacks in the way that because they're only 2D, we can't get any kind of three-dimensional lighting occurring on these. So if I wanted to have a person sort of centered in the foreground here with a little bit more dynamic lighting, I might have to switch to using a 3D person instead of a 2D one. Now these aren't as easily accessible, but I have found one here which I'll put a link in the description of the video. This person on Turbo Squid, and this is a free download of just kind of a character we're going to use for this particular scene. You can find quite a lot of these free trials or free downloads of different people online, so do have a look, and Turbo Squid is a good resource for this. So for this one, to add in this character, instead of making a texture, I've just downloaded that version from Turbo Squid, and once you do that you'll get this kind of folder with this sort of average man, and I've downloaded the FBX file here, and we're just going to load in this file here, which is the kind of 3D object file. So to do that we're just going to go to File, Import, and then locate that file here and hit Open. Now if all the textures and the images are in the same folder as this model, as you can kind of see here, we've got these Targa files and these are all image files, and because they're located in the same folder as the 3D model, this should automatically bring in the textures with the model. So if it asks you for scaling, just hit yes there, because it will usually recognize the dimensions you need in your scene. And there we have our character, and I'm just going to rotate him upwards so he is facing the right way around. Move him up slightly. I'm going to delete this kind of text here of the model. Make sure we have all of him there, and just move him out so he's kind of at the center of the file like so. And I want him just sitting on the grass, so we're just going to kind of make sure that he's just standing on that surface there. And as you can see, now we've brought him in, let's open up the render again and just make sure we're in the right view and re-render this. You'll see now that with 3D people, the lighting on these characters will be much more dynamic than that of 2D people, because we've got the kind of three-dimensionality of the object. He'll be kind of lit from behind and above, just like the kind of rest of the scene, and there you can see our kind of character there. We could always bring him more in the foreground if we wanted to, but actually I kind of want him just casting a bit of a silhouette in that sort of entrance way there, and we're just going to kind of move him just so he's sort of illuminated by this sort of red panel behind him, like so. And you can see there it's kind of cutting out a sort of silhouette at the front of that building, like so. Now with the placement of people, I always try to kind of make it so the kind of placement is inviting you in, or kind of silhouetting themselves out to tell a little bit of a story of this place. And you can be quite creative with how characters are positioned in these scenes to really make the most of the geometry you're trying to show and the kind of ways through the building or the landscape that you're trying to portray, like so. Now we could always kind of have other people in the foreground, and just to give you an example, let's copy this guy sort of really close now, right up to the sort of foreground around here. Make sure he's in the view. I think he's slightly out of frame. It's floating above that. Just minimize this for a second, and we're just going to bring him into shot. There we go. So you could always have these characters kind of more in the foregrounds of your shot, more in the background, depending on kind of what sort of image or atmosphere you want to try and portray. And here you go, there he is, sort of sat in the foreground there by that pool. So it might be that we wanted a kind of character off in the foreground here. Now sometimes with these 3D models, if they're not sort of amazing in terms of their quality, they might look a bit strange when you brought them into the foreground of your scene. So it's kind of personal preference whether you want them to be kind of really visible or kind of just in the background to add a little bit of atmosphere into the scene. But as you can see, they'll cast reflections nicely, they'll pick up on the lighting of the scene as well. So there's lots of different ways you can use these figures in these scenes, like so. For this particular one, I'm just going to keep it with the guy by this sort of central part of the building here, and we're going to keep the landscape at the front quite open, so we're going to just remove that one for now. So there was just a couple of ways you can begin to add characters and people into your VRay scenes using 3D people or 2D cutout people in the background of scenes. So I hope you found this video useful, and in the next video we're going to be looking at applying atmospherics to this view to really kind of make the image come alive and give a bit of depth and atmosphere. Thank you for watching.